Okay, hello everybody and welcome back to the build. In this video we are going to finish up installing the brakes and install the brake calipers and pads and soft lines. Okay, so stay tuned. Alright, so these are the brake components we're going to install in this episode. Let's see, a couple comments. This is the base brake package that comes with the kit. And essentially it's a 2010 Camaro SS brake setup. RCR also provides a couple optional brake setups. They have a genuine big brake Brembo kit, and they also offer, I think they're the ZR1 carbon fiber discs, so you can get pretty exotic with the brake setup. For my purpose, this setup will be more than adequate, and actually really like all the components that came with the kit. So you see here you've got the rear calipers. The bigger ones are the front calipers. These are actually made by Brembo. You can see the Brembo branding on them. Up top you got the front brake pads and then the rear Brembo brake pads. They also give you all the hardware, the soft lines, the banjo fittings to connect the soft lines up to the hard lines, and also the retaining clips. And these are all, brand new, genuine GM parts. Okay, so we're just going to take this install one step at a time. Thanks for following along. All right, well, the first step is to apply anti-seize to the face of each hub. Not that this car is going to see any harsh weather. But if I have to take everything apart, and at some point I may actually want to upgrade the bearings on this car. I have to disassemble everything, and just using anti-seize where appropriate makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to coat all the hubs with anti-seize, make sure I don't get any on the threads, and then we'll get to the next step. Okay, well, I anti-seized one of the hubs up. Make sure I don't get any on the outside, also on the inside hub, so when it spins it doesn't get on the rotor. But I think this will be helpful long term. Okay, I'll do all these and then we're going to move on to the next step, which is insert the banjo fittings on the calipers. Alright, well anyway, I've done a little work here. I mounted the calipers on the uprights, the front and the back. I'm trying to figure out how to place these lines. The RCR provides a couple different sizes of lines for the master cylinders, and also the soft lines for the connecting to the calipers. And as best I can tell, this is the correct setup, or the recommended setup. So you have the sort of the 90-degree coming off the hard line. And then you have enough of a loop here so when the steering rack is turned, you basically can compress and expand that line. A couple of things here though. I still think this line's a bit too long for its purpose. And this here too just seems a little odd to me. So I ordered another banjo fitting that's a stub fitting. And that'll take up about an inch here, and then we'll see if this sort of fits a little better. Also around the back, this is the recommended path as well. You have the rear caliper. Let me get a better angle here. You have a rear caliper, and then you have the banjo fitting. And that comes to the inside here, and then it drops down. But also it just seems like a lot of line, and you probably have to attach it, maybe attach it to here. But New Jersey inspection, I think they like those brake lines free floating and not attached to anything that's moving. So I ordered a 90-degree banjo fitting to really come around this way and just use a shorter line and connect it right there. So the next segue, when I get those parts, we're going to plug them in and we'll see if it lays a little better, then we'll figure it out. Okay, I figure this is worth showing. So anyway, there's a picture of the brake line with the shorter banjo fitting installed, and I do like that better. I think ideally I'd like that line a couple inches shorter, but then again, I don't know how far it really needs to reach when it's at full droop, and also if you turn the steering wheel. But anyway, at a later date. So this is sort of the way the lines move. And it keeps it, away from the spring, keeps it away from the A-arm. The one thing I don't like that it's just sitting a little low. But anyway, I'll worry about that at a later date. I do want to point out something. Being a beginner, I don't always understand the nuances here, but this is the original fitting that came with the kit, and you can see it's just a lot longer, and having this thing rotate with the arm, it's just making that line move an extra distance for no reason. Now, one thing you can see is the thickness of these two are actually quite a bit different. So I bought these fittings because they said it was a universal fit, and it turns out also inside the area that holds the fluid is very narrow in this fitting, and in this fitting it's actually a lot wider. So it turned out that the banjo bolt was too short for this, and the hole really didn't line up where the channel was, so I had to go and buy the matching Earl's fitting banjo bolt for these. These are actually nickel plated, these are zinc plated. They actually make stainless as well. They're a bit more costly, but I figured I'd just go with a plated fitting. No big deal. So anyway, I'm going to torque these up. I'm going to torque these to 30 foot-pounds. I'll put a little dab of anti-seize on it, and then I'm going to torque up the bolts on the calipers, the front calipers, to 95 foot-pounds. I'll also put a dab of anti-seize on those bolts as well. Okay, well, I torqued everything up, and I've got a few comments that I want to point out. So first off, the banjo fitting, I did not torque it up to 30 foot-pounds. I wound up torquing it to 20 foot-pounds. And basically it was sort of hard to keep the banjo straight. As you tightened it, it wanted to rotate. Not that the threads are stripped, but the whole banjo wanted to rotate. So, I had some extra washers, and at 20 foot-pounds, those crush washers are quite crushed. So I'm going to leave it at 20 foot-pounds, and I'll talk to some other folks, and I'll sort of keep an eye on it. But if I bleed the brakes and they leak, obviously I got an issue. The other thing is, I torqued these bolts up to 95 foot-pounds, and I did find the specs for a 2010 Camaro SS, and they actually use torque to yield bolts. And they say to torque these bolts to 44 foot-pounds and then an additional 90 degrees. Now, torque to yield bolts are single usage, and they stretch. And these are actually 12.9 bolts, and they're not going to stretch like torque to yield. Basically what I did was I looked up in a table for threading, tightening a 10.9 metric bolt into aluminum, and it's recommended to tighten that to 95 foot-pounds. So I'm using a 12.9 bolt because I like the hex heads on them. But anyway, I'll sort of mark these and I'll keep an eye on them. But I think I think that measurement or torque spec will be just fine. All right, now we'll move over to the back brakes. Okay, well, here's the next step. We're going to install the front brake pads in the calipers. You can see these are GM pads, but they're made by Brembo, and they're directional, so the brake pads follow the rotation of the rotor. And basically I watched a few videos online about installing these brake pads, and most guys use a little bit of this brake lubricant or brake grease, and they smear it right along the leading and trailing edge, and then they also put some grease on the pins where it goes through the pad, and that sort of stops, stops some clanking and squealing, I guess. But anyway, we'll take it one step at a time, and I'll show you how I approach this. Okay, well at this point we have the brake pads in. I basically took the pins, we feed them from the inside, and put a light layer of grease on those. Then you have the retaining clip. So this clip really goes under one pin, then you'll bend it down, and then we'll drive the other clip through. And then we'll tap them in with a hammer and a center punch. Okay, so that'll be the next step. Okay, well here's a little tech tip. So one thing I noticed is once you get these retaining pins placed in the caliper, you have to make sure the ends are all the way in by hand. And you've got to line up the end of this pin to start to enter the caliper. It's actually a smaller diameter. It's easy to think they're in and they're not. So if the pin is not really starting to tuck in, you've got to sort of fiddle around with it. But now it's ready to be tapped in with the hammer. Okay, well we got the pins all the way tapped in. I'll tell you, this was fun. This was easy. It just pays to watch a few videos and see how most people do it, and you just take your time, but these look good. So now we'll move on to the rear calipers. All right, moving on to the rear brakes. So in an earlier segment, I mentioned that I was going to order a 90-degree fitting for the back line here. And it turned out the fitting sort of interferes with this, toe rod attachment, so there was no way to use it. So I'm going to go with the recommended setup. I was actually watching a video, a gentleman up in Connecticut. He's the premier SLC builder. His first name is Alan, and this is exactly the way Alan mounts these. And you can orient these lines, as you twist them and tighten them up, and they're really not going to move. So, I think we're in pretty good shape just the way they are. They're not going to hit the bottom A-arm. I also picked up a brake line clamp for a quad, and actually it'll clamp on here and then clamp on there. So if I did want to secure that a little more, I could. But anyway, let's go back to the work table here, and these are the rear brake pads and the clips. So this is really the final, piece of work I have to do. Funny enough, they actually give you grease, so I didn't have to go out and buy that other large container of grease, which I probably used about 1/10 of an ounce. But just being a beginner, I guess the moral of the story is open up all the boxes and see what you have before you go out and buy grease. But anyway, we're going to apply the grease to these anti-squeak shims, and then we'll install the pads in the calipers. All right, here we go. Well, we applied the grease to the anti-squeak shims, and then they just get placed on the back of the pad. At first go, I used a cheap brush from Home Depot, and all the hairs just got stuck in the grease. Just figures, so I had to dig out all the hairs, and then I got a little higher quality brush from I think Hobby Lobby. I bought a whole assortment of brushes when I was working on the fiberglass seats. But anyway, they're looking good. We're going to install these on the calipers, and then the final segment will be just taking a look at the wheels on the car and checking out how the calipers look. All right, well, another episode of the Superlite Coupe build is coming to an end. You can see I've got all the tires mounted on the car. We've got the calipers installed. We have the soft lines installed and the brake pads installed. So we got quite a bit done. I'll point out a couple things. Here's the front rims. I got the lug nuts installed. These are open top lug nuts. I think they look pretty darn cool. Also got the center cap installed, and then we'll take a look at the rear wheels. These are 20-inch. and also have the open top lug nuts and the center cap installed. We take a peek around the back here, we can see sort of the, how the brake line works. And one thing I'm happy with is when I fabbed this up, I made sure it was extra tall and the line clears the lower control arm by a good margin. And the way that brake line is routed, I think it'll provide plenty of movement as the suspension travels. Then we've got the front line. I showed this line before, but I think what I didn't show was having the cooling tubes and AC tubes in place. So you can see there's plenty of room for all those components, and none of them interfere with each other. Okay, so anyway, thanks again for watching, and take care.